As he makes his first official trip to the US, Nicolas Sarkozy says America can count on France. Is this a departure from traditional French policy, or has little changed between the two countries? What price, if any, would France pay by this new alliance? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Garda. The French president is consolidating his country's ties with the United States. It's been all smiles and pleasantries on Nicolas Sarkozy's first official trip to the US. On a speech to a joint meeting of the Congress, Sarkozy sought to put the final seal on renewal of a relationship that seemed severely damaged by the Iraq War. Hugo Macpherson has more.
Madam Speaker, the President of the Republic of France.
A rapturous welcome for Nicolas Sarkozy. It was the first time in 11 years that a French president's spoken personally to the US Congress.
Et les épreuves de l'histoire de nos deux pays.
The history of our two countries has reinforced our friendship. With friends, you can disagree, you can have differences of opinion, you can even argue with each other as families do.
At dinner on Wednesday night, US President George Bush underlined points of common policy worldwide.
French and American troops are helping to defend a young democracy in Afghanistan. Our two nations support the democratic government of Lebanon. We agree that reconciliation and democracy in Iraq are vital to the future of the Middle East.
But President Sarkozy's message was a lot shorter.
I want to reconquer the American heart, and reconquer the American heart once and for all.
The French president's worked hard to win those hearts, even taking time out of his holidays in the US this summer to visit the Bush family at home. It's this close personal relationship between the two leaders that's a stark reminder of just how strained France's relations with the US have been.
6, 7, 8,
French protests in the run-up to the US-led war in Iraq were among the largest in the world. Then French president at the time, Jacques Chirac, was openly critical of the Iraq War. It was seen on the American side as a betrayal. But since he took over from Chirac in May this year, Sarkozy has taken steps to heal some of those wounds. He even went as far as sending out France's foreign minister in August to Iraq. This week, Pakistan's ongoing crisis provided an opportunity for Sarkozy and Bush to put their show of Franco-American solidarity to the test.
I spoke to President Musharraf right before I came over here to visit with President Sarkozy. And my message was that we believe strongly that in elections, and that you ought to have elections soon.
Et c'est très important que le Pakistan.
It's very important that Pakistan can organize elections, and like President Bush, I hope it will happen as soon as possible.
The olden days of awkward French-US relations seem long gone.
Long live Franco-American friendship.
Hugo Macpherson there. Well, joining us are our guests in Paris, Renaud Gérard. He's the chief foreign affairs correspondent of Le Figaro newspaper. In Washington, D.C., Raymond Santa. He's a professor of political science at Georgetown University and a former member of the U.S. National Security Council. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. Gérard, if I could start off with you. Is this a huge departure from traditional French policy?
It's not a huge departure, but it is a departure. There's a long time since a French president said, "I love America," and goes to the States to say, "I love America," and spends his holiday in America. And of course, you know, since de Gaulle withdrew from a military structure of NATO in '66, you remember that de Gaulle also criticized the American policy in Vietnam, the war in Vietnam in the '60s. And de Gaulle also warning in '67 Israel not to attack first, and Israel not respecting de Gaulle's warning. Yes, you had cooler, I would say, relationships between France and America, though of course they stayed allies and very strong allies. It's the strongest alliance in the world and the oldest. But now it's really a message of France, of reconciliation, and this crisis of 2003 should have never happened. And,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Some would say that maybe he's reversing. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Some would say he's reversing much of the prestige France may have built up in the Middle East.
Yeah, but actually on the content of his policy, he didn't change the real de Gaulle policy. I mean, he insisted in front of the Congress, insisted that a Palestinian state should be given right away to the Palestinians. He insisted that war was not a solution for Iran. He is, of course, totally opposed to the idea of Iranian atomic bomb, but he doesn't say that it's an option that the war is an option against Iran. He was very critical of President Bush administration and even of Clinton's administration about the Kyoto Protocol. I mean, that the fact that America doesn't want to lead the world in a fight against climate change. And it was funny because he was very much applauded by American congressmen when he said that, you know, American policy towards climate change, towards environment should change. So, but actually,
yeah, that's very interesting. Sorry to interrupt you. I want to throw that to
French
Raymond Tanter. Sorry to interrupt you. I want to go to Raymond Tanter for a second. It's interesting, Mr. Girard mentioned that because it was quite a performance at Congress, wasn't it? Because even when he seemed to be subtly criticizing the United States for not doing enough to prevent the dollar sliding, as well as not doing enough to combat global warming, he got a standing ovation. How do you explain that?
Well, look, I was on Capitol Hill last night, and President Sarkozy is something of a rock star. He is the equivalent of President Sadat going to Jerusalem, criticizing the Israelis at the Israeli Knesset, and Sadat was welcomed. The fact that he was there, the fact that Sarkozy was there, was the bottom line. And the message that Sarkozy presented was to reaffirm the strongest, the oldest alliance, as Monsieur Girard said, in the world. In 1776, Ambassador Benjamin Franklin was sent by George Washington over to Paris in order to cement an alignment that had Paris and Washington to work together against the British. So it is a reaffirmation of the American-French tie that we see today. And I'll stop right there.
And some newspaper editors have had great joy announcing Sarkozy as Bush's new poodle. Is that a bit unfair, Mr. Tanter?
That's absolutely incorrect, because you have a situation where President Sarkozy can help lead President Bush. For example, the European Union does not designate the National Council of Resistance of Iran as a terrorist organization, and that is the parliament in exile of the largest Iranian opposition group. Paris does not designate as well. Now, there is a need to develop a third option between failing diplomacy on one hand and infeasible military action against the Iranian regime on the other hand. And empowering the Iranian people through their main opposition group is an option that is catching fire not only in the United States, but within the Arab world as well. It's very important that the heartland of the Sunni Arab world, especially Saudi Arabia and the smaller Gulf states, will understand that there's been a transformation in world politics, that the French-American alignment focusing on financial restrictions against banks, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps being designated as a terrorist entity, and thirdly, empowering the Iranian people by supporting their main opposition groups. That's the way things are going in the French-American Entente.
Let's bring in Mr. Girard. As Raymond Tanter pointed out there, they definitely seem to be singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to Iran and what they consider the nuclear threat. Why do you think so? And why do you think they've gone for such a gung-ho approach?
I think that, I mean, it's obvious that President Sarkozy doesn't want Iran to be a nuclear state. I mean, actually, no Arab countries want to see Iran having a nuclear bomb, because it would, of course, launch a kind of race for nuclear armaments in the Middle East. Would be very dangerous. You know, Turkey would want it, Egypt and the Emirates and so on. The thing that, you know, the support that Sarkozy gave to Bush is very simple. I mean, Bush, America has never been so weak in the last 20 years, you know. Bush's father's America was very strong, you know, very successful.
That's why some people will be asking, what does
War
France stand to gain, particularly at a time when the US seems to be very weak and low on credibility?
Yes, yeah, because very low in credibility, very weak in its economy, and in the dollar is very weak, and very weak even in the internal economy with the subprime crisis, the banks crisis in America. But then the guy comes from France and helps. So he shows that France is a good friend. And I think that was very clever from Sarkozy. He didn't yield anything on French foreign policy, but it just, you know, when America is very weak, he comes and said, we are a friend. We don't forget we have been friends for 230 years. And I think that it will not be forgotten, not only by Bush, but also by all American politicians, be they Republican or Democrat. I think it was quite wise from Sarkozy, because actually he didn't yield anything.
Raymond Santer, why do you think there was no mention of Iraq? Is it because they'd have to concede that they have fundamentally differing views on the premise or pretext to the war and the war itself as it is?
Well, as my colleague from Le Figaro knows, Iraq is history, it's yesterday's story. Tomorrow's story is Iran. The focus is on what the international community will do about the Iranian threat. And diplomacy is failing, military strikes seem to be infeasible, and that's why empowering the Iranian people as an option seems to come alive as an alternative in transatlantic communications. I had an article in Le Figaro this week in which I pointed out that this empowerment of the Iranian people option is the future, and therefore the Arab states have to come along with this program as well. Otherwise, they'll be left to the circumstances of being intimidated by the Iranian regime. Bahrain is claimed by Iran. Saudi Arabia may be kowtowing toward the Iranian regime unless the Saudis come along with this new alignment that is based on transatlantic cooperation between France and the United States, and the Arab world can supplement that by helping to empower the Iranian people. So, Imran, the yesterday's story, Iraq, tomorrow's story, or today's story, is Iran.
All right, gentlemen, don't go away. Time for a short break. When we come back, we'll ask, will new U.S. alliances across the Atlantic promote Washington's political interests? Do stay with us.